G'day again guys, and thank you for joining me. So I was at a little bit of a loss this week at what I wanted to create. I didn't have a lot of time to spare this week, so I thought I'd want to have a play around with my pan pastels again because they're really fast and fun, but I didn't have any particular subject in mind. I always seem to be drawing birds and cats, so I was feeling a little bit bored with that and wanted to try something else, but I really didn't know what to do. So I had a look through my big folder of reference photos trying to find some inspiration. I had a few pictures put aside, but I really couldn't find one that really screamed at me that I had to draw this one next. So I chose 4 photos that I thought I would enjoy drawing, and I put it to a vote amongst my family and friends, and this lemur won the day. My favourite part of this image was that contrast between the bright greens of the background and the yellow eyes and the black and white tones of the lemur himself. So I chose to create this piece on a sheet of white pastel mat so that my colours would stay nice and bright and vibrant without having to compete against the colour of the paper. I started off this piece by getting my background into place, using a combination of greens. I wanted that background to have a very soft focus, but not blended so much that it was just one solid wall of green. So I spent a little bit of time adding down different blods of that pan pastel green and just pushing and pulling them around the page until I liked the result. The pan pastels are fabulous for backgrounds like this because you do have that freedom to move those colours around and change whatever you like as you go. This makes the process very fast and very relaxing because you really can't go too far wrong. With the background in place, I started blocking in the colours for the rest of the lemur. In my last pieces using the pan pastel, I have chosen to draw the eye in colour pencil first, but this time I decided to try blocking it in the same as I was the rest of the piece. This turned out to be quite a mistake because I found myself really frustrated by the lack of detail. I find that I really like having those eyes in place early in a piece. It's just the way I like to work, and it usually sets my bearings a little for the rest of the piece going forward. But just having that yellow smudgy blur, I found myself a little disorientated, and I'm sure I will go back to drawing in those eyes first next time. Next, I moved into blocking in the fur. I used a combination of black, Payne's grey and white to get that layer into place. Now, I knew I would be adding a lot of white hairs on top of this layer with my white pencil, so I made sure that this pan pastel layer was just a little bit darker than I intended the final value to be. Now, while I was doing this, I wasn't paying any attention to the details whatsoever. I was really just concentrating on the values that I was getting down and the direction of the fur. Now, this is another reason that drawing in this way is very, very fast. Usually with colour pencil, I make these decisions about value and flow section by section as I work around the piece. But blocking in like this means that by the time I get to that colour pencil layer, all of these decisions have already been made and all I have to do is focus on the details. I did run into a little bit of trouble as I got to that dark layer on top of his nose. As I put that black pan pastel down over the top of my drawing, I really did start to lose track of where my line drawing actually sat. I don't normally draw animals like this. Like I said before, birds and cats I can do with my eyes closed, but this is a different animal and I'm not familiar with the shape of his face. And even after all these years, for some reason, I still really struggle trying to get 3/4 profiles into place. So with those lines gone, it was really hard for me to judge where I was going to be putting my drawing over the top. So I used a piece of white transfer paper to retrace my original line work back over the top of that pan pastel layer. This worked brilliantly and stopped me from having to work out that drawing all over again. Once I had that face and neck into place, I really did start to get into a rhythm with this pan pastel layer. I threw in a little bit of those sienna tones and a little bit of that phthalo blue just to make the tones a little bit more interesting, and I had this entire pan pastel layer down within about 40 minutes. When I was happy to move on, I did give this piece a spray with some workable fixative. I don't think this step was entirely necessary with the pastel mat. That pastel mat grips the colours really, really well, and I don't think that the pastel mat was going to smudge anywhere or really be difficult to work with at all without that workable fixative. And honestly, I think I sprayed it more out of habit than anything else. But either way, I had a quick cuppa while I waited for that fixative to dry, and then I was ready to move on to the colour pencil layers. I could finally start working on his eyes. I had lifted off quite a bit of the original pan pastel layer that I didn't like in this area because I didn't want it to interfere with the colour pencil that I was going to put down on top. Now, I'm not really sure why I did this. I don't think that it would have made too much difference, but I did just have that feeling that I wanted a clean surface to work on. The excess pan pastel lifted off very easily with a kneaded eraser, so I was happy to move on. With those eyes in place, I started to see how this piece was going to come together, and I started to get really excited to see the final result. Moving on to the fur, and things started to get really fun. The pastelmat makes it really incredibly easy to layer lights over darks, so I chose a selection of my cool grey and white polychromos pencils and worked going backwards and forwards, just layering those hairs one up on top of the other. I used the pan pastel base as a guideline to the direction of the fur. I did still have to pay attention to my reference photo. I didn't want to assume that I'd got it right the first time, but having that sort of layer already down made this so much more relaxing and so easy to get into. By the time I got to that chest area, I was really comfortable with how this piece was coming together. I was layering my lights and darks and occasionally throwing in some elements of blue and brown just to make sure that he wasn't too monochromatic. There was that little touch of blue light hitting his face from the left-hand side, and that was really fun to explore and something that I hadn't noticed until it was actually time to sit down to draw the piece. Finding these little tricks of light and form are probably my favourite part of drawing realistically. It's getting a chance to see a part of the world that you never would have noticed until you slowed down and really took the time to look for it. I must admit that finding this little touch of blue light just made my day in a really geeky kind of way, and I can't say I'm ashamed of that. Finally, I was ready to get those finishing touches in place. I used my black polychromos and sharpened it to a very, very fine point, and using a light hand I just flicked some nice fine lines to create whiskers above his eyes, around his cheek and over his nose, and I was ready to call this piece done. So here's the final piece, and I absolutely love how this one turned out. The combination of the pan pastels, the pastelmat and the colour pencil together just work all together to make this whole process really fast and fun. This whole piece only took me about 2.5 hours to make, and I am absolutely in love with the result. This piece will be listed for sale over in my Etsy shop along with a range of other original and prints, so head on over there if you'd like to have a look. I'd also like to take a moment to thank my patrons. The first real-time video for this piece is available for you guys now, showing you the pan pastel layer from start to finish, so I'd love to see you guys there. I hope you've enjoyed this. Please leave me a like or a comment to tell me what you think. I do have something different in the works for you next week, so if you'd like to see that, then hit that subscribe button. And of course, as always, thank you so much for watching.